At a superficial level, the OnePlus 7 Pro 5G is a very simple product. Take one of the best Android phones of the moment and slap in a 5G modem for even faster connectivity. But there's actually a lot of nuance to this device and the network on which it runs. Like any first-generation technology, there are trade-offs that aren't always obvious at first glance. So, do you need a 5G phone in 2019? And if you do, is this the one to get? Let's dive in. So first, some background. I've been using the OnePlus 7 Pro 5G for the past few weeks on EE's nascent 5G network in the UK. EE is very proud of being the first in the UK with 5G, and while this is a huge achievement, early networks are prone to growing pains, which we'll get into a little bit later. The phone itself? Well, it's a OnePlus 7 Pro. Same great 90Hz screen, same bezel-less display, same triple rear cameras. In a meeting with OnePlus ahead of the phone's launch, they told us that CEO Pete Lau was insistent that, unlike other 5G phones, the OnePlus 7 Pro 5G would be the same size, shape, everything as the 4G model, which perhaps explains why that version of the phone is also a bit of a chunky monkey. Anyway, literally the only visible differences between the 4G and 5G version are the 5G branding down below, and the lack of a 48 megapixel label on the camera module like the global 4G models have. Not sure why that's the case. It's also single SIM, not dual SIM, which is a bit disappointing for travelers, but not unexpected for a carrier exclusive. You're also limited to a single SKU with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. There's no Vanti spec option to go all the way up to 12GB. At the same time, you can expect a slightly slower rollout of software updates since EE needs to sign off on that stuff too. I'm currently on OxygenOS 9.5.4 on this thing, and that update rolled out around 3 weeks later than it did for the 4G model. Not a huge deal, and certainly a lot faster than a lot of carrier-branded phones, but it might be a source of frustration once the 4G model gets updated to Android Q. The unlocked 4G OnePlus 7 Pro is still going to be first in line for software updates then. The other big downside you might have heard about early 5G phones is that they'll have bad battery life. In my experience, that really hasn't been the case with the OnePlus 7 Pro 5G though. The first firmware update added a smart 5G switching feature, but OnePlus wasn't able to give me any clear detail on exactly how this is smarter than your standard 4G 5G switching. In any case, I've been pleasantly surprised by the battery life of this phone. Bizarrely, it's actually seemed to be a little better for me than the 4G version was. Perhaps that's just because the firmware has moved on a little bit since I reviewed that phone. Whatever the reason, using 5G certainly hasn't given me any major battery anxiety. So what about EE's network itself? The operator has lit up 5G in 6 cities so far: London, Cardiff, Edinburgh, Belfast, Birmingham and Manchester. I've been using 5G primarily in Manchester and London, and I found the network to be solid, though with a fair few caveats. In the right locations, you can absolutely see seriously impressive download speeds. My test maxed out at about 600 megabits per second. Those are rare cases, but speeds of around 300 were readily available in London, with around 100 to 200 being pretty common even in areas without blanket 5G coverage. Because of the way EE and most other 5G networks have implemented the technology, 4G and 5G work hand in hand. Calls are handled over 4G still, and 4G and 5G are aggregated when you're downloading. That means when you're on 5G, some of the download bandwidth is provided over 4G, with 5G giving you that extra high-speed gravy on top. For the moment though, there's no 5G upload. And as someone who uploads a lot of video content, that is a little disappointing to me personally, but from EE's perspective, it's way easier to show off an early 5G network that lets you download an episode of your favourite Netflix show in seconds as opposed to minutes. 5G uploads will come later, and when they do, I'll be pretty excited. EE's network runs on sub-6 GHz frequencies, currently around 3.5 GHz. That's as opposed to the millimeter wave frequencies used by Verizon in the US. Millimeter wave gives much more impressive speed test results when you're close to a cell site, but sub-6 is easier to build out over a large physical area, which is why it's dominated most of the global 5G rollout so far. The other side of the interplay between 4G and 5G is you might see a 5G logo in your status bar when the 5G part of that connection isn't contributing all that much to your download speed. I noticed this a few times in areas like St Pancras and London Bridge, where it seemed like the 5G reception wasn't great, but the 4G network was also pretty congested, which led to me seeing 5G in the status bar, yet with data speeds that were only in the tens of megabits. It's not a great experience, but as the 5G network grows, these are the kinds of early teething issues that we can expect to become less common. I didn't run into situations like this every day, but they were easy enough to reproduce around the edges of EE's coverage area. At the same time, in Manchester, I came across the highly ironic situation where Piccadilly Station and the Arndale Centre were blanketed in EE 5G advertising, yet these parts of the city aren't in EE's current 5G service area. So if you've got a shiny 5G phone, you'll see ads proclaiming that 5G is here, only to see a 4G icon in your status bar. In fact, in Manchester there's a pretty big chunk of the city centre that is outside the initial 5G coverage area. Data speeds in Manchester city centre generally lagged behind what I saw in London, outside of a few areas where downloads spiked past 300 megabits. All of these things are to be expected with an early 5G network, and they're things that I experienced 7 years ago when EE first launched 4G LTE, but still, it is worth pointing out. Whichever city I was using 5G in, however, the major thing I benefited from was more consistent high speeds than on LTE. Sure, there are times when I can pull over 100 megabits on 4G, and that makes for an impressive social post, but when you're getting that in the middle of a crowded city reliably speed test after speed test, that's undeniably impressive, and that's the promise that 5G is eventually going to fulfill. Big question though is how well all this scales as more people buy 5G phones and start using up that bandwidth. For its part, EE is committed to staying ahead of the curve and defending its hard-fought 5G advantage. I'm not going to say that 5G has revolutionized the way I use a phone. The fact remains the data caps are pretty much the same as 4G, the super high speeds aren't universal yet, and the phones and plans are expensive. You can't get those magic multi-hundred megabit speeds everywhere just yet. Early 5G is like early anything in tech. All the parts aren't quite there yet, even though it's clear there is a ton of potential here. If there's a reason to buy into 5G now, it's for an early taste of the super fast speeds of the next decade. It's there for early adopters with a bunch of strings attached. But if you decide that you just have to try the future today, the OnePlus 7 Pro 5G and EE's new network are a pretty good way to do so. That's it for now. You should subscribe for more 5G phone reviews and check out our review of the regular OnePlus 7 Pro for more on what else is going on with this phone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.